welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. 2 Kings 13 contains the fascinating story of Elisha's last hours and how Joash, king of Israel, came to visit his sick room for a final blessing in the task of confronting his nation's enemies. Elisha said to the king of Israel, "Put thine hand upon the bow." And he put his hand upon it, and Elisha put his hands upon the king's hands. How different this scene with its close walls and slow wasting from the open plain beyond Jordan from which Elijah had gone up. But God is as near his servant in the one place as in the other, and the slow wasting away is as much his messenger as the sudden appearance of the horsemen of fire. The king of Israel came to the old prophet and very significantly repeated over to him his own exclamation over Elijah, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof." But Elisha took no notice of the grief and reverence expressed in those words. He went straight to his work of preparing the way to the king's future. His last effort is to stir up the sluggish young monarch to some of his own enthusiasm in the conflict with the enemy. God had inspired him that to devote his last breath to stimulating successors who might catch up the torch that dropped from his sailing hands was no unworthy end of a prophet's life. So there followed the scene in which the dying man had far more vigor than the young king, to whom he gave a series of curt commands. Take the bow and arrow. Then the prophet lay his wasted hand on the strong young one, and having thus indicated God's power, said, "Throw open the window towards the enemy, and now shoot." And he shoots. Then the old man gathered himself up on his bed, and with a triumphant shout exclaimed, "The Lord's arrow of victory! Thou shalt smite the Syrians till they be consumed." And then came the second stage. The promise was given, the possibility was open before the king, and now all depended on whether he would rise to the occasion. So the prophet said to him, "Take the sheaf of arrows in your hand, and then now smite upon the ground." It was a test of faith. If he had been roused and stirred by what had gone before, and any eagerness to grasp the promise that had been given, he would have beaten the ground with a sheaf of arrows until only splinters remained. But this king hits 3 little taps on the floor, and having done what will satisfy the old man's whim, he stopped as if tired of the whole performance. So the prophet burst out in frustration on his dying bed. "Thou shouldst have smitten 5 or 6 times, then hadst thou conquered utterly. Now thou shalt conquer but thrice." Seems to have been only briefly that the prophet's hands were laid on the king's, but this momentary touch of the wasted hand on the muscular young one communicated the power the young man needed and the old prophet still had to give. We too as Christians have a gospel, the very essence of which is that we too have been touched by a hand greater than our own, enabling us to find the spirit of victory over those forces that would destroy our souls. The very name of that divine spirit, whom it is Christ's greatest work to send flashing and flaming through the world, is the spirit of power. And so the old promise that ye shall be clothed with strength from on high is a standing prerogative of the Christian church. There's not merely some partial communication as when hand touched hand, but every organ is vitalized and quickened, as in the case of the other miracle of this prophet when he stretched himself on the dead child, eye for eye, mouth to mouth, hand to hand, and each part received the reviving influence. We have, if we are Christian people, a spirit given to us and are strengthened with might by the Spirit in the inner man. That gift, that strength comes to us by contact, not with Elisha, but with Elisha's Lord and Master. Christ's touch when he was on earth brought sight to the blind, healing to the sick, strength to the limbs of the lame, life to the dead. You and I can have that touch. We can draw near to him, have his spirit in close contact with our spirits, and is strengthening us for all service. Have you talked to him today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.